Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a great day. Thank you for attending our NYCAR monthly CRE broker forum. This is an opportunity for us to give some content, the latest and greatest in commercial real estate news, and also advertise our number one priority, whether it be seller, buyer, landlord, tenant. We give everyone an option. I do moderate it, and depending on how many people participate is how much time we have to go over the different situations. So I encourage anyone you know that is in commercial real estate and either they have a problem that they need to work out with one of their listings or other client needs. And even if you don't and want to, say you're residential or whatever, and want to just learn a little bit more about commercial, you're welcome to join us. All of these are recorded. We put them on the NYCAR webpage as well as the YouTube webpage. And I always encourage feedback. And if you have any presentation content that you'd like to see, I'm always happy to hear it. You can contact me, Teresa Mueller, the chair for the CRE Broker Forum. I would love to listen to whether you have something that you'd like to share or you know someone that it would be great for them to share their content. Happy to have them on. So I am going to introduce Jim. He is today's presenter. And so before I just mention a couple things and introduce him, I am just back from Europe. I went to Expo Real, and this scarf afterwards is from Venice. I went there just for a couple days to kind of go see Venice before it sinks underneath the water. And prior to that, I regularly go to MIPIM. I have been to Expo Real before. And why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning it because when we go to these international events, we go as a cheerleader for whatever city or state we live in. And as you can see from my background, I'm Chicago, but I regularly attend regional and national meetings where I'm interacting with brokers all over the US. And so maybe when I meet someone in Cannes or Munich, and they're not necessarily looking for something in Chicago, which that breaks my heart, but if they are looking for something somewhere else, I can cooperate with other brokers. But the question is how? How do I do that? So not that the whole process is going to be laid out here, but we're going to introduce you to this idea of using your license in other states and what's entailed there. So Jim is much more the authority than myself, even though I have been transacting with other brokers in other states. Jim is much more the authority and can go into it. So Jim Hochman, he's going to give you a little bit of background about his experience, and then go from there. If you have any questions, I would appreciate either putting it in the chat and or holding it to the end. We will take questions. And then after that, please do stay on. Jim may not be able to stay on for the networking session, but we end the recording and we give everyone an opportunity to go through their number one need or want. So go ahead and put your information in the contact in the chat portion. We will save it. Jim, if you would like to go, I'm handing the platter over to you.
And the platter is in my hands. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be back to NYCAR. I don't know how many of you have been members of NYCAR since the beginning. I will tell you that I worked with the founders of NYCAR some 30 years ago with the concept of an overlay board. So it's always a source of pride for me to come back and work with you and your members on various topics. I always welcome the opportunity not only to return to NYCAR, but to talk about various things in our commercial brokerage industry. Now, who am I and why did I get chosen to be your speaker today? I could go through my biography, but my professional bio, but I will spare you that. The reason is, A, it's on my website, www.schainbanks.com. B, I'm old. And because I'm old, I have an extremely long bio. You don't need to know all the neat little things that I've done to occupy myself as an attorney since, yes, 1977. But the highlights are that since 1982, I've been able to focus my practice on commercial real estate brokerage, licensed services, etc. I started as the in-house counsel with a company called Coldwell Banker Commercial that has morphed a series of name changes to CBRE. I had the pleasure of being CBRE's regional counsel, covering 22 states ultimately from 82 to 2004. So that gave me an opportunity to focus and to specialize a little bit. It also gave me the opportunity or the need to understand license portability. Since 2004, it's amazing what life deals you. I thought I would, frankly, retreat to a quiet solo practitioner practice in Wheaton in a friend's office, go gently into that good night, and call it a career. Well, let's see. That was 20 years ago. With a couple of firms, my practice has grown, and here I am, another 20 years later, still going full time, doing a number of things for your industry. I represent a great many real estate brokerage and management firms, both locally and nationally. I do litigation that involves real estate. I do IDFPR defense, in other words, license law complaint defense. I do a fair amount of speaking, a fair amount of teaching, and I've even written a few laws, some of which you might know and like, such as the Illinois Commercial Real Estate Broker Lien Act. Yes, that little beauty started in 1990, became law effective 1/1/92. That's a story in itself. I mention lien rights because license portability and understanding license portability is necessary to preserve lien rights in the various states where you're doing business. And yes, there are 34 states which have commercial real estate broker lien rights. So I'm all about representing brokers. I do all kinds of things for you. You'll find my contact information on my slides if you have questions and wish to follow up. And yes, I am available for consultation, and my firm can be hired to assist. We recently formed a real estate brokerage law practice group, of which I am the leader. There aren't many firms in Chicago that I'm aware of that have that much real estate brokerage law business to form a practice group. Some of my partners represent some great firms as well. I think we're doing great things for our industry. Enough. What's license portability? First thing we're going to fire up, Kathy, is the map, I guess. That should be slide 1. We're going to get a brief look at it and come back to it. Just take a quick glance at this. Now, Caesar wrote in his commentaries that all Gaul is divided into 3 parts. We have, for purpose of understanding license law and license portability, decided to classify the United States and their states in 3 groups. Just take a quick glance. It's kind of like a traffic signal. We have turf states or T states. Stop, don't cross the state line. You can't do business in a turf state if you don't have a license. There are physical location states. We'll call that an amber color. Those are states where you can work on a transaction without a license, provided you are cooperating with a local licensee and you stay in your home state. And we have the green states, which are cooperative states, where you can actually go into the state with some limitations occasionally to do business. So if we can then go to the next slide, let's talk about this thing called license portability. All right, license portability, my definition, I don't think you'll see this in the statutes, is the right of a real estate licensee licensed in one state, you're all licensed in Illinois, to perform licensed brokerage services with respect to real estate located in another state. We'll call that the transaction state where you are not licensed. Now, let me pause for a moment. License portability is not license reciprocity. Reciprocity is when you decide you're doing enough business or you have enough opportunity to do business in a state, let's say Indiana or Wisconsin, that you want to go and get a license in Wisconsin or Indiana, you will apply. You will meet certain requirements. You may or may not have to take an exam. You will get a license, and you will have continuing education responsibilities, and you will become a licensee of that state. That's not what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to try and leverage your Illinois license into licenses of other states. We're going to talk about how you can work with licensees of other states using license portability to engage in transactions and earn commissions. So now let's talk a little more specifically about different states and their definitions. And Kathy, if you'll go to the next slide, let's talk about the good guys. A cooperative state is one where legal authority, either implicitly or explicitly, allows an out-of-state licensee, OSL, out-of-state licensee, to physically enter the transaction state, possibly with exceptions or limitations, provided that the OSL and a licensee of the transaction state enter into a written co-brokerage agreement, which assigns duties and responsibilities and confirms sharing of compensation. So cooperative is the green states, and these are the good guys. You'll still need to know exactly which cooperative states apply and what the specific statutes or rules are relating to license portability. You don't just slip into the state in dead of night, quietly crossing the border, looking at property, signing a commission agreement, making a deal, and leaving. That's not cooperative. That's called unlicensed practice. And that is a problem. And we'll talk about how that can bite you in the hind end a little bit as well. Kathy, if I may have another slide, preferably the next one. There we go. Physical location states where an out-of-state licensee may neither enter, if you'd go back, you're tricking me. I want to go with physical location. Thank you. Where an OSL may not perform licensed services on a real estate transaction while physically located in the transaction state. The OSL may work on the transaction and receive part of the commission from a licensee in the transaction state, provided that all of the licensed services rendered by the OSL are rendered while you're physically located in his or her state of licensure. A little history. When I was coming up with these terms, other authors seem to have adopted them throughout the nation. I was in-house at CB, and I was trying to deal with what we then called marauding brokers, brokers who would head to other states, call their activities consulting services, claim that they could invoice for a fee, and slip in and out of the state without telling anyone. Again, the marauding brokers. My original definition for physical location state was moccasin state. I said, look down at your moccasins, and where if you are licensed where your moccasins are, then you're good to go. The HR department pointed out that by using moccasins, that might offend some Native Americans. So I was convinced that I couldn't call physical location states moccasin states. In fact, now we call them physical location states. So we have cooperative and we have physical location. And if I may have the next slide, we have turf states. And I call them turf states because licensees of that state are guarding their turf. They're not letting anybody in except for referral fees. Turf, where an OSL, out-of-state licensee, may neither enter the transaction state nor work on the transaction from his home state. Referral to licensees is permitted, and referral is mandatory if the OSL is to share in any compensation. Referral fees may be paid and negotiated, but no licensed services may be performed by the OSL on a transaction in a turf state. So Consider that the turf states are red. Consider that a red stoplight or a stop sign. Now you understand the three categories. Let me talk to you about why that matters.
Jim, before you go through the why that matters, a quick question. If someone here has a license and they are a principal in a property of the state but not licensed, can they still be practicing if they are the owner?
Generally, the owner working on his or her own property is not performing licensed services for compensation and for another. Therefore, a license is not required.
But they are, what if they are still cooperating with other agents? Say they're willing to pay a fee.
You're not performing licensed services, you're acting as an owner.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so if you own other property in another market, you're simply investing in property in another market. That's not licensed services. Marty, did I see that your hand was up?
No, I agree with you.
Oh, good. So the chance that I'm right, now that Professor Norcutt has blessed it, you can take that one to the bank. All right, well, why do you care? Why does NYCAR care, and why should each of you care? Proper licensure must be alleged and proven in order to collect, or if necessary, sue for a commission. So if I were representing any one of you and filing suit to collect a commission, I would have to allege, all right, we're going to come to Wilford Brimley in a minute. I would have to allege that your firm and each of the individuals working on the transaction are properly licensed. So if you crossed a state line and worked in another state and the owner decided not to pay you, surprise, surprise, you'd file suit probably in the name of the local licensee, alleging that you were properly licensed. So if an owner knows that the broker does not hold a required license, the owner may be able to refuse to pay or perhaps seek to negotiate to reduce your fee. And you must have the proper license in the transaction state in order to assert lien rights. Again, only licensees of the state where the property is located may assert broker lien rights. An OSL performing licensed services beyond what applicable law allows is deemed to be performing services without a license. A violation of the Transaction State License Act. You slip into Wisconsin to make a deal. You slip into Indiana to make a deal. You choose not to share your fee with a cooperating broker in that state. You're in, you're out. A violation of the Transaction State License Act. Discipline rendered, reported against you in another state, guess what? Could result in sanctions from warnings through stiff fines in both the transaction state. Okay, you say, I'll never go to Idaho again. It was a one-off. What do I care what Idaho thinks of me? Guess what? You go to renew your Illinois license, and Illinois will ask you on that renewal application, have you been disciplined in any other state? If you answer no, when the answer is yes, guess what? They'll find that, and that's another violation. If you answer yes, you'll need to explain it so that Illinois decides you are worthy to have your license renewed. So you don't want a license law violation in any other state because it impacts your license renewal in Illinois and all other states where you might have licenses. So you don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to tempt a party owing you a commission to resist paying you. Fact is, even when there's no reciprocity, no cooperation allowed between some states, discipline travels. And there is this organization called ARELO, the Association of Real Estate License Law Officials. They meet a couple of times a year. They scratch each other's back. They share information. And unfortunately, the discipline in one state travels and bites you in the hind end when you seek to renew your license at home. So you're looking at double discipline, and you're looking for possible renewal problems. You should have a company policy to obey license law. If you don't observe applicable license law, you may be in violation of your own firm policy. You may jeopardize your license in the transaction state, you jeopardize your fee, and you jeopardize your own license at home. None of those are good for either your company or for you. Now, how do we classify states as cooperative physical location or turf? Where did this come from? Again, let's go back to the mid-'80s. Sears owned CBRE, then Coldwell Banker Commercial. We were opening offices left, right, center. The legend was if the chairman went to downtown wherever, saw a couple of tall buildings, therefore there's an office building market, saw an industrial park, boom, let's open. That's how offices such as in places like Oklahoma City got opened. So Sears owned CB. CB was expanding across the nation, and brokers were chasing deals wherever they could find. As is so often the case in a brokerage company, they come to in-house counsel and they say, this seems to be a problem, Jim. What do we do about it? Because we want you to solve it. The manager in Kansas City is very upset that a California broker swooped in, did a capital markets transaction, sold an office building, didn't have the cooperation of the Kansas City office, didn't have a Missouri or a Kansas license, extracted a huge fee and left. Obviously, Kansas City was not happy. Obviously, the company was not happy because the Kansas or the Missouri Real Estate Commission might just step up and say, you've got a problem here. So they drop it on the lawyer's lap and say, what are we going to do here? We've got to make this stop. That led me to do some research to understand the license law in various states. That meant I was looking at the license laws in all the states. That includes rules which are promulgated by, in our state, IDFPR. So all states had license acts and rules. I was looking at reported case law, and I was looking at what the real estate commissions in the various states would say in the way of a published policy, something that they might say on the website, a letter or a memorandum that might be published. And I looked at the zeal with which some states enforce their rules quite vigorously. Let me give you an example. I mentioned Idaho before. Idaho was a state that had a great big stop sign at the border, and anyone who worked on an Idaho sale transaction without an Idaho license, even in cooperation with an Idaho licensee, had violated Idaho law. And I met with the enforcement people several times by telephone, and I was told the fine is $3,000. The court costs are $300. Your client is going to pay $3,300, or come on out to Boise. Let's try this case and let's see if you do any better. Well, I had CB brokers from California and Illinois slipping into Idaho, and guess what? They all got a fine of $3,300. Despite all my best efforts, despite the great arguments that I made about real estate, commercial real estate being global, being national, Idaho should welcome licensees of other states. I made great arguments. I will tell you they were wonderful arguments. None of my clients did any better than $3,300. Years later, I learned that Idaho had become a cooperative state. I was thrilled. I called the Idaho Real Estate Commission, was directed to, you guessed it, the same head of enforcement that I had talked to years previously, and said, I've noticed you've changed your law and you're more welcoming for transactions with out-of-state licensees. He said, I'm happy you asked. I'm happy to tell you why we did it. You know, commercial real estate is actually a global or at least a national industry, and brokers should be able to represent their clients across state lines. I'm going, holy spit. He doesn't know who he's talking to. I made these same arguments to him with no success years ago. Apparently it resonated, and Idaho came all the way around and became a cooperative state. So good for us. But the point is, you need to know where to go and where not to go. And while I gave you the map earlier, and that is a very simple, gross or general discussion of license portability, understand that each state is a little bit different. Cooperative states have specific statutes. I wrote some of them, and there are specific requirements, such as submitting to the jurisdiction of the transaction state. So you need to know before you go. All right. Using license portability. Always. Capital A, always. You can take the slide down if you like, Kathy. I'm going to pause for a moment on the slides. Always collaborate with a local licensee when listing property. An old mentor of mine told me that pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. Don't be a hog. Don't seek the entire commission because you're going to lose. Always collaborate with a local licensee when listing property. Always have an in-state licensee in the deal, either as listing broker or a co-broker on tenant rep. Know the applicable laws. Know the limitations. Know when you must refer, such as a turf state. Know when you must stay home and work on the deal from afar. Those are your physical location, or as I hoped to call them, moccasin states. And know when you are permitted to physically enter the state with a written cooperation agreement with an in-state licensee, meeting state-mandated requirements. Let me chat for just a minute about state-mandated requirements on cooperative states. North Carolina requires notice of affiliation with a resident North Carolina license broker and obtaining a temporary commercial license that's good for about a year for a transaction. So if you're going to go into North Carolina, you got to find a resident licensee, you've got to affiliate, and you've got to apply for a license before you go in there. The great state of Idaho will welcome you, provided that you first obtain a temporary license to work on an Idaho transaction. Nevada will require a temporary license, but only for certain buyer rep roles, and you can't have that license or use it for tenant rep, only for purchases. Now, some states will also require that they get a copy of your broker cooperation agreement. That's the agreement you enter into with the in-state licensee, and that it be filed with the real estate commission. And there are some states which dictate what must be addressed in that agreement. And I represented a lovely lady. They call her the queen of self-storage, a Massachusetts broker who collaborated with a New Hampshire broker, listed New Hampshire property. The deal went awry. A complaint was filed. And New Hampshire decided that this lovely lady should be literally crucified and fined heavily because her broker cooperation agreement was not detailed, was not the form that New Hampshire Real Estate Commission promulgated and required. Just an example of know before you go. Now, your broker cooperation agreement will vary from state to state. It may include one or more of the following components, depending on the state. All will require an agreement to cooperate. Most require an agreement to share documents with the local licensee, an agreement to advertise the property if it's a listing in both the OSL's and the local licensee's names. They will all require that earnest money, if held by a broker, must be held in state. There will be an agreement on sharing fees. There will be an agreement to submit to the transaction state jurisdiction and discipline, and an agreement to comply with the transaction state law. The agreement should also state both start and end dates of the broker cooperation agreement. You will have different broker cooperation agreements for different states. The agreement will also require that the in-state licensee is responsible for the OSL's actions. So when you're signing on with cooperation, you're not just renting a license. Here's $1,000. I want to list property in your state. Do not ever do that. Cooperative states are not alike. Again, some prohibit co-listing, New Hampshire, Nevada, Wisconsin, Virginia. Some prohibit in-state negotiations, again, cooperative states, but with limitations. Michigan, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota. Some states consider negotiations to include more than offer-counteroffer. It might include all licensed activity that leads to a deal. Rhode Island and Wisconsin have case law with a very broad definition of negotiations. Some physical location states have their limitations, even if you stay home. So you need to know about those. And then there are the turf states, and I will name them alphabetically. Illinois. Yes, Illinois is a turf state, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. Iowa, Nebraska, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Vermont, and the District of Columbia. Again, Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Vermont, District of Columbia. It might not be clear in the statutes or the rules, but that's the way the Real Estate Commission views things. All you can do is refer your client, refer the listing, refer your user, step back, enter into a referral agreement, take your fee when the deal is concluded. Let me illustrate my point, and Teresa, I hope I've got just a couple of more minutes because the war stories are the best part.
This is great. Go ahead, Jim.
I'm asking you in a way where I expect you to say, "Oh yes, Jim, I'm hanging on your every word. Please give us a few more."
I am hanging on every word. Go.
All right. Idaho. I told you about folks that slipped into Idaho to work on a deal. One or two even cooperated. They each paid $3,300. Tennessee and Texas have case law and statutes which seem to welcome out-of-state licensees, and yet Tennessee Real Estate Commission considers its state to be turf. Texas has changed its rules so many times. You're now at the point where you can work on a Texas deal, but you may not conduct negotiations while located in the state, and there are also limitations on what you may do with residents of Texas. So that one's tricky. Illinois, years ago, I represented a client, a corporate services or national client was seeking to renew its lease in a small town in Illinois. And the corporate services guy worked on this small deal with only nominal involvement of Illinois brokers. The Illinois brokers got a spanking for that. The deal should have been referred to the Illinois brokers. Recently, I was referred the opportunity to represent some Texas brokers who listed your triple net lease investment. They engaged the services of Illinois brokers. Here's $1,000. We'll co-list the property. We'll give you a sub-agency agreement. We will work with you. Well, the state of Illinois has decided it's a turf state. I could make the argument under the License Act, Section 1010E. I could make the argument under some of the case law, specifically the Dollar Properties case, that Illinois is a physical location state, and the enforcement people are wrong. You'll lose. You'll lose because IDFPR has its own courts, its own judges, its own rules. It's their bat, it's their ball. Illinois considers itself a turf state. All incoming brokers are permitted to do, in the IDFPR's eyes, is refer. I had an Illinois broker representing an Illinois tenant. They called him. We'll say it's Larry. Larry, we've outgrown our space. We need more space. Help us find 100,000 square feet of warehouse space. Tenant mentioned to landlord, we're going to be moving out at the end of our lease. We're not going to renew. We need much more space. Landlord said, you know, you're a great tenant. I happen to have a building in southern Wisconsin. Would you be willing to consider leasing space in my building in southern Wisconsin? tenant toured the space with Larry. Everybody came home. Larry sat at his desk, facilitated the negotiation of a new lease for the Wisconsin property. Everything would have been fine, but Larry went to the ribbon cutting. And people took pictures. And they named people at the ribbon cutting ceremony. And there was Larry with his very bald, distinctive haircut, similar to my own. And someone filed a grievance against Larry in Wisconsin because he did not have a Wisconsin license. He did not collaborate with a Wisconsin licensee. Simply attending the ribbon cutting, and Larry found himself answering a license complaint. I've also had situations where Illinois brokers have made Wisconsin deals, and literally the Wisconsin landlord stands on the north side of the cheddar curtain and waved at him and Scotty and gave him the one finger salute, and didn't pay. So you cross a state line, you don't have licensure, you don't have a cooperating broker, you could get stiffed. These are all the reasons that you do what Wilford Brimley said about eating oatmeal. It's the right thing to do.
Jim, do you want to talk about the reverse of that, where the Texas company, we found the building here and they wanted to get paid, and I could have been also in jeopardy if I had paid them. You represented us.
Well, I love talking about a case that I've won.
Jim, before you do, Steve had a quick question about the fees that were exchanged with Larry in Wisconsin. Were there any fees that were exchanged, referral fees of any kind?
I don't think Larry had anything to do with a Wisconsin licensee. He went up, he showed the property once, he negotiated a lease, and the landlord paid him a fee.
Okay.
Well, there's the issue, and the question really is, did Larry get in trouble just for showing up in Wisconsin, or was Larry, can I go to a ribbon cutting if I'm not collecting fees, but I have a real estate license in Illinois and I showed up at some real estate event? Am I going to get attacked, or was it
probably not
that triggered?
Probably not. Well, back in the day, the Wisconsin brokers had a bounty on fibs.
Right.
All right. And a fib is a term for blanking Illinois illegitimate child, fib, F-I-B, or sometimes fib tab, add to it towing a boat. So there was a bounty on Larry's shiny bald head. But to answer Bill's question, and that was a fun case, we had a Texas buyer of Illinois real estate listed by Bill's firm, and the Texas buyer, the contract, if I recall, Bill, actually said the buyer would pay its own broker. And yet, when the closing documents came out in the closing statement, the buyer's Texas broker had parachuted into our commission and claimed half the fee. Bill was kind enough to allow me to turn on my billing meter, and I did a little research and was able to confront the Texas broker's lawyer and say, I don't see a Texas broker license. I don't see an Illinois license. I don't see any basis on which you can claim a fee, or your people can claim a fee from anyone, much less from my client. In fact, my client would be breaking the law if it paid you a fee at this point. So get thee hence. We're not paying you a dime. And that lawyer came back. That was on, I think, a Friday, Bill. And they came back on Monday morning and said, well, we've done our research and we're not going to claim a single penny from Caton Commercial. So Bill's firm recovered the entire fee. It was substantial, if I'm not mistaken. It would have been substantial if it were mine. It was a good size fee. And we were able to preserve the entire commission for Bill's firm. So that's license portability as a shield, if you will. Just an example of know before you go. So what do you do? What do you do when you're looking at an opportunity in another state, you're going to look at the map. You're going to devise a plan, whether you're going to cooperate, whether you're going to find and execute a written agreement with your co-broker in state, and you've got to know your limitations, and you've got to know when you must refer as opposed to work on the transaction. With that, I will tell you there's a lot more to license portability. There's a lot more to understanding all the authorities in the 51 jurisdictions, including District of Columbia. There's an art to drafting these broker cooperation agreements. Yes, I'm available to represent your firm and advise you on these things. What I'm giving you folks in this brief presentation is a taste and discussing the issue. I'm not giving you the compliance manual. I do have clients that have paid for that research and those cooperation agreements. I can't give them away. It's that simple, but I am available to help you. With that, I will answer any questions. I don't know how many participants have questions. I'm not good at talking and reading the chat at the same time.
Okay, so I will ask a question, and then anyone else, I saw some questions in the chat. Feel free to raise your hand, and I will call in the order that I see the hands raised. My first question is, all the time I see here in Illinois, these large brokerages that they have something listed and someone's out of state, right? I don't know where they're at, sometimes New York or Tennessee or wherever they're at, the listing broker. So what is the likely situation of what's happening there?
You know, I'll take my good friend George Good at CBRE, runs the regional shopping center department, and they list and market property all over the country, but they utilize local brokers where and as required, state by state. George and I go way back. He's a very bright man, and he understands the value of compliance with the law. He understands the pigs get fat, but hogs get slaughtered, and he works with compliance. Now, there are lots of people out there that are not respectful of license portability requirements, and they're probably going to get away with it most of the time. However, you folks, when you have a listing or you complete a transaction, you put it on your website, and your website is out there, and there are people that will look at your website and use it against you to note that you are violating license law or you have violated license law, and they'll come get you that way. And state real estate commissions will do that search. They will look at the website. They will do an entire web search to see what you've been working on, and that's where people get caught. Usually license law violations come from competitors or disgruntled parties to a transaction. That's when a real estate commission springs into action, a complaint is filed, and they investigate. Sometimes the complainant goes under an alias. And you know what? Real estate commissions don't care. Me, I wouldn't give an anonymous complainant the time of day, but I've defended 2 matters in Illinois that have arisen from anonymous complaints, if you can believe it.
Thank you, Jim. Steve, you want to go ahead with your question? And then Eric, I think you had a couple questions if you want to go next.
Actually, I'm going to tag on to a question that Eric initially asked. Eric said, if I'm a principal in a property in a state I am not licensed, may I still be the listing agent for the leasing of the property? He's a principal in the property. The extension is including, I don't actually own it. It's owned by an entity in my control. In some situations, you get caught up in that technicality. The IRS just looks at it as a pass-through, but there's other scenarios, and I'm wondering if license in any of the states are going to say, Eric, you don't own that property. XYZ LLC does. You're only a principal in that LLC.
Good point, Steve.
Interesting question. I can tell you that I have worked with the owner exemption in Section 5-20 of our own act, and I've been successful in audit scenarios. You've all been audited from time to time, a compliance audit with IDFPR, and I've been able to point out that leasing activities by owner and owner's unlicensed staff are permitted under 5-20. That language has recently changed in the new License Act, though I'm not so confident that that owner exemption will work as easily for you in Illinois. I'm afraid it's just too big a question, too broad a question for me to detail the owner exemption on the other 50 jurisdictions. I can certainly research it. We can certainly figure it out. But I can't tell you
That's a really
how far.
significant one, given we own everything in an entity these days.
It could be. It could be.
Stack
If you
in there
mark
with the
it, again,
CTA, now we're adding a layer in there of a land trust is actually the managing member owner of an LLC. And you get into this stack of entities. I may control all of them, but I'm not a direct property owner. And it's a very significant issue because none of us, everybody I know on this call has enough experience to know not to own real estate in their own name.
I agree with that concept. You should certainly own it in a single asset entity for asset protection, but I'm not in a position to tell you how far the owner exemption flies in a state-by-state basis. That might be
I hope
very interesting.
NICAR will ask you to investigate that on their behalf. I think it's a very significant issue that should be clarified. I had one other question.
I can do it. I will tell you, Steve, I can do that research, and I could do it myself. I could have young people fetching the license laws and the regulations. That's beyond the scope of my gratis presentation today.
As I said, I hope NICAR will ask you the question.
There you go.
What's your
Okay.
next question, Steve?
I did have one other question for you. In a number of your slides, you used and fees, exactly how it was stated. I don't recall, but it raised the question for me, is there any requirement in any state that fees be paid from one to the other? I've practiced for years that my client as a buyer pays my fee wherever we go. I rarely show up on a closing statement. I have a relationship with my client pays fees.
The likelihood that your buyer representation and receipt of buyer rep or tenant rep fees not so likely to be noticed if you're doing it out of state, but it is a violation of or comes under the aegis of licensed activity, and therefore license portability law and rules would apply. If the tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, did the tree fall? Did it make a sound?
If I speak in the forest and there's no woman around to hear, am I still wrong?
Eric, do you have a question?
Guys that know me laughed at that one.
I was just curious on Jim's thought on the national broker of record companies. For example, out of Cincinnati, there's a Bang Realty Group that you can hire to be your broker of record for what almost any state that they, like in almost all 50 states, I could hire them to be the broker of record. What's your position on those kind of companies?
You know, I know Bang. I have clients that have worked with Bang Realty. I've spoken to that fella in Cincinnati, and I have found that his understanding of license law state to state is excellent. His fees I have found to be reasonable, and he is quite professional.
Okay.
There's another firm out there that I've discovered that offers a similar service. I'm not going to name the owner of that company. I'm not going to name that firm. But I was able to determine that it was he who acted as the anonymous complainant against my Texas and my Illinois defendants with a license law complaint in IDFPR. So what he was doing, and we proved this, what he was doing was ratting out his competitors or brokerage companies that did not use his services. So not everyone who's in this business is playing it quite straight.
Thank you.
Is there any last questions before we adjourn the presentation portion? Marty?
Yeah, Jim, who were the founding fathers of NICAR?
Ah, I can
That was
see him
Tony
in front of me.
Dennis Gillig. I worked
Pardon me?
in Dennis Gillig's office at the time.
Dennis Gillig was involved. There was another fella.
Tony Perry.
Yep.
Tony was in early on, and there was another guy who really came up with the overlay board concept, and I can't recall his name.
Is that Frank Whipple?
Nope,
Tom Conrady?
nope.
Ahmed, did you also have a question?
Yeah, Teresa, I do.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, Joe.
Morning.
Man, your name, when I saw it the other day, man, took me back to the mid-'80s. I was with Inland at that time, and also we were doing a lot of stuff through folks in Wheaton. We had an office, a Main Street office at Wheaton. So you featured prominently, but then I thought you went to retire in Hawaii or something. Didn't see you again. But great bit of information here. So question about co-brokerage. Do each state have licensing law govern co-brokerage? So I had a call from somebody in West Virginia who had a luxury property that was marketed both for, it was actually built for a commercial use as a retreat. And so I posed the question to her. She was there to the listing agent, and I said, well, so she basically checked with the association, and they said, well, we can't do that yet. But
West Virginia, Ahmad, had recently issued a retiring executive director said no license lending. West Virginia is a turf state, and if people want to work on a West Virginia property, it's turf, and you can't cooperate with a West Virginia licensee to co-list property. That's one of those things you wouldn't know because it's not apparent in the statute or in the rules. You would only know because I know because the West Virginia Real Estate Commission has promulgated this opinion letter.
So, for
Again.
example, say they have an agreement with each other. So, but he is representing Ahmed's here in Illinois, and then there's that other co-broker. Ahmed cannot appear on any marketing materials or anything other than just collect a referral fee.
That's exactly right.
okay.
States
Yeah.
change.
People-
States change. Ohio used to be a turf state. And one of the managers at CB invited me to an Ohio Association of Realtors meeting. And I said, folks, you should change your law. Because when someone calls and says, I have a 100,000 square foot user, will you cooperate with me? May I come and see your property? Every Ohio broker will say, come on in. I'd love to show my property. I want to get it leased or sold. When the Ohio broker cooperated under the old law with the out-of-state licensee, the Ohio broker was in violation. The Ohio Association of Realtors said, that's ridiculous. We should change the law. We should cooperate. The new in-house counsel for the Ohio Association of Realtors was none other than the former general counsel of the Ohio Department of Commerce, who had been enforcing Ohio's turf law. Her name is Peg Rittenauer. She's a wonderful lady. She's very bright. She said, I was never comfortable with the way the Department of Commerce, enforced that statute. We should definitely change it. Ohio ultimately, with local counsel, Jack Birch and I, helped rewrite the statute and the rules so Ohio is cooperative. We have changed a number of states from turf to cooperative. But it takes cooperation from in-state. I worked with the Indiana Association of Realtors and got it done there, for example. New Hampshire, got it done there. Kansas, got it done there. Just by way of example.
So what happened in Nevada?
I haven't had anything to do with Nevada, but it has a temporary license available to out-of-state licensees who cooperate with Nevada licensees on sales only, and they don't allow cooperation on leasing.
Okay, any last questions?
What do we
I
need to
sense
do
the
to
hook is
change?
coming.
what do we need to do to change Illinois back to cooperative?
Good question.
How many of you are members of Illinois Realtors? How many of you would work with me to reach out to Betsy Urbance, who is my friend and the general counsel of Illinois Realtors, and talk to her about that?
The
And
guys
see,
with more time can do it.
I'm sorry?
The guys that are raising their hand with more time can do it.
Okay. I'm happy to engage Betsy in that conversation. By the way, if you want to get something done with the Illinois Realtors, you got to work with them, not against them. And if it's limited to commercial, and we're not getting into the bad word turf, but if you're not imposing on Illinois' residential realtor population, which is their vast majority, maybe we've got a shot. So if NICAR wants to get involved in such an initiative, and by the way, I could talk to some of my other organizations to support it, I would love to work and change that law. I am tired of defending respondents before IDFPR based on a law that I think is prosecuted in an unusual way.
I think that this needs to work through the Public Policy Committee. We have committees. Yes, no, I do think it does.
Well, there's a commercial committee there too.
With Jim, I'm not saying not to work with Jim on it, but we do have committees, and Marty, you can join in with that committee and participate in this, but we work with our GADs who are Illinois Realtors.
It's a different subject whatsoever.
So, okay, we could take that discussion offline, and we want to be respectful of Jim's time right now. So, I appreciate everyone who came on to listen to this presentation, as well as all of the questions. Jim's bio is on the event page. This is recorded, so you will see it again on the NICAR page, as well as our YouTube page. The slides are available. Just go ahead and email info@nicar.com. Kathy has those slides. And then if you have any questions, I encourage you to reach out to whether it be NICAR or Jim, and we appreciate content going forward. So please reach out to me, the chair, Teresa Mueller. I'm always happy to hear questions, comments, concerns, suggestions, whatever. And after this, we do have a networking session, which we do not record, and give everyone a chance to advertise their number one priority. And even if you don't have something, we encourage you to stay on and listen if you can. So thank you for attending this NICAR CRE Broker Forum, and hope to see you next month.